Okay, finding the multiplicative inverse of a 3 by 3 matrices. Unfortunately, we do not have a formula similar to the one for a 2 by 2 matrix to find the inverse of a 3 by 3 matrix. So instead, we will augment the original matrix with the identity matrix and use row operations to obtain the inverse. So if we're given a 3 by 3 matrix, so for example 2, 3, 1, 3, 3, 1, 2, 4, 1, we're going to set it up with an identity matrix to the right of that, which is going to have a diagonal of 1s and then 0s everywhere else. And then to begin, again, we write the augmented matrix with the identity on the right and matrix A's on the left, and then we're going to perform elementary row operations so that the identity matrix appears on the left side, and then we will obtain the inverse matrix on the right. We will find the inverse of this matrix in the next example. So, given a 3 by 3 matrix, we want to find the inverse. Step 1, we're going to write the original matrix augmented with the identity matrix on the right. Step 2, we're going to use elementary row operations so that the identity appears on the left. Step 3, what is obtained on the right is the inverse of the original matrix. Step 4, we're going to use matrix multiplication to show that matrix A times the inverse is equal to the identity, and that the inverse times matrix A is equal to the identity. So let's find the inverse of the 3 by 3 matrix. So, in step 1, we're going to augment A with the identity matrix and then begin row operations until the identity matrix replaces A. The matrix on the right will be the inverse of A. So here's our matrix on the left-hand side, 2, 3, 1, 3, 3, 1, 2, 4, 1. On the right side, we have our identity matrix with a diagonal of 1 and 0s everywhere. So now what we can do is we can rearrange row 2 with row 1. So we have row 2 and row 1 now. So row 1 is 3, 3, 1, 0, 1, 0. And row 2 now becomes 2, 3, 1, 1, 0, 0. And so now to get that 1 in the upper left-hand corner, what we can do is we can multiply row 2 by a negative 1 and then add it to row 3. So negative 1 times 2 plus 3 gives you a positive 1. Negative 1 times 3 plus 3 is 0. Negative 1 times 1 plus 1 gives you 0. And then negative 1 times positive 1 plus 0 is negative 1. Negative 1 times 0 is 0 plus 1 leaves you with 1. And negative 1 times 0 is going to be 0, and plus 0 leaves you with 0. So now that's our row 1. There's row 2 and then row 3. Okay, so just like we did in step 3, we can take a negative 1 and multiply it by row 2 and then add it to row 3 to make that a 0. So negative 1 times 2 is negative 2, plus 2 gives you 0. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3, plus 4 gives you 1. Negative 1 times positive 1 is negative 1, plus 1 gives you 0. Negative 1 times positive 1 is negative 1, plus 0 is negative 1. Negative 1 times 0 plus 0 is 0. And negative 1 times 0 is 0, plus 1 is 1. Okay, so now, since we have 0 here and a 0 here, and we want this 1 to be in the middle, we can interchange row 3 and row 2. So interchanging row 3 and row 2, now row 2 is going to be 0, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, and 1. And now row 3 becomes 2, 3, 1, 1, 0, 0. Okay, now the next step is that we want, now that we have a 1 here, we have a diagonal of 1s, and we have a 0 here. But we want to make this 2 a 0. So we're going to multiply row 1 by negative 2 and then add it to row 3. So negative 2 times 1 is negative 2, plus 2 gives you 0. Negative 2 times 0 is 0, plus 3 is 3. Negative 2 times 0 is 0, plus 1 gives you 1. Negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2, plus 1 gives you 3. Negative 2 times positive 1 is negative 2, plus 0 is negative 2. Negative 2 times 0 is 0, plus 0 gives you 0. So on the left-hand side, we're almost getting the identity matrix. And what we need to do is make this 3 a 0. So in order to do that, we can multiply the second row by negative 3 and add it to row 3. So negative 3 times 0 is 0 plus 0 is 0. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3 plus 3 is 0. Negative 3 times 0 is 0 plus 1 gives you 1. Negative 3 times negative 1 is positive 3 plus 3 gives you 6. Negative 3 times 0 is 0 plus negative 2 is negative 2. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3 plus 0 is negative 3. So now, since we have the identity matrix on the left side, whatever we have remaining is going to be the inverse on the right side. So A inverse, or we can call it matrix B, is the matrix negative 1, 1, 0, negative 1, 0, 1, 6, negative 2, negative 3.